The meeting ended 40 minutes early. I stood outside the Wilshire Boulevard office and looked at my watch. 3:20 in the afternoon, nothing scheduled until my car at 4:30. I was 67 years old. I had built a construction company from a two-man office into a firm working across 6 states, and I did not know what to do with 40 free minutes. So I walked. I told myself I needed a birthday gift for my daughter Megan, something for her San Francisco apartment. A painting, maybe. That was what I told myself anyway. The gallery had no sign, just a wooden door propped open, warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. I stepped inside. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with portraits. An older man with white hair and paint on his forearm looked up from his workbench. "Take your time," he said. "There's no rush." I moved slowly past the faces until my feet simply stopped on their own. A smaller painting hung low in the corner. A woman seated at an angle, hands open in her lap, head tilted, smiling the private smile of someone caught in a thought no one else was part of. It was my wife. Not someone who resembled Claire. Claire. The exact tilt of her head, the exact crinkle at the corner of her left eye. 35 years of marriage had written every detail into my memory, and every one of them was on that canvas. "The woman in this painting," I said, my voice not fully my own. "Who is she?" The artist set down his brush. Her name was Clare Hale. She was a regular here for years. When this gallery was about to close, she went door to door on this street and saved it. He looked at the canvas. "I made this to thank her. She never saw it finished." A pause. "She passed away. About 2 years ago. Her husband never came here, as far as I know." "I'm her husband," I said. He didn't speak. He walked to the back and returned with a small, plain wooden box. "My name is Daniel Whitmore. Your wife left this with me before she passed. She said, if her husband ever sees this painting, give him the box." Back in my hotel room on Wilshire, I sat with that box in my lap for a long time before I opened it. Inside were 3 things: Claire's small blue notebook, a sealed envelope with my name in her handwriting, and a folder of photocopied documents. I opened the notebook. Claire hadn't written about her illness. She'd written about our son, Ethan. He changed the subject when Richard mentioned the quarterly numbers. Tonight made 3 times. I saw a loan document on his desk with a lender's name I didn't recognize. When I asked Richard about it, he genuinely didn't know, which means he didn't sign it the way he thought he did. I had missed it entirely. My wife, standing in my study with a coffee cup, had caught what I never saw. Further in, Ethan called Dr. Bennett today and asked how long I realistically had. Not whether I was comfortable. How long? My son called my doctor to find out when to begin. I set the notebook down. This wasn't grief anymore. It was something colder. The last entries were shakier, written closer to the end. "Richard, if you're reading this, Daniel did what I asked. There are documents in the envelope. They're not complete, but they're enough to ask the right questions. Whatever Ethan has told you about Megan, don't believe it. She doesn't know what he's done to her either. Find her first. I love you. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was still there to hold your hand." Inside the envelope, financial documents, and a single folded page with 2 words: "Find Peggy." Peggy Lawson had been our family attorney for 22 years. When I called her from the cab home, she didn't sound surprised. "Come to my office at 9, don't call Ethan first, and bring your original bank signature card." She laid 3 loan agreements on her desk, Beverly Hills lenders, my signature on each. I placed my real signature card beside them, close, almost right, but the cross-stroke on the H in Hale, the one my father taught me at a kitchen table 50 years ago, angled the wrong way on all 3. My son had practiced my signature and gotten it almost perfect. "How much?" I asked. $4.2 million, Peggy said. "And Richard, one transfer, over $800,000, went into an escrow account in Connecticut, for your house." Our accountant, Warren Ellis, came in the next morning with the rest. The borrowed money had covered losses Ethan was hiding from investors, real losses running 31% higher than what he'd reported. The same quarter our CFO, Marcus Webb, had refused to sign off and been fired for it. Buried in the loan paperwork was a guarantor clause. If the loans defaulted, full responsibility fell on me. My son hadn't just stolen from me. He'd built the whole structure so that if it collapsed, I would be the one left holding it. I drove to our house in Greenwich that afternoon. In the safe behind the bookcase, under old tax files, I found a real estate listing agreement for our own home, filed through a Beverly Hills brokerage, closing date in September, my name nowhere on it as the seller of record. Behind it, a will modification I had never signed, notarized by a man I'd never heard of, reassigning control of everything to Ethan if I died or became incapacitated. I called Peggy. While we were talking, Megan called in. "Ethan told me you're selling the house," she said. "Is that true?" "No," I said. "And I need you not to call him until we've talked." I flew to San Francisco. I told her everything at her kitchen table. The gallery, the notebook, the forged signatures, the house. Then I told her the part I'd been dreading. Her biggest client, Westbridge Design Partners, was a subcontractor of Ethan's company. He'd handed her enough work to matter, work he could pull the moment she asked the wrong questions. A leash disguised as an opportunity. He'd also told her I was losing my judgment, that Claire's death had hit me harder than I let on. And Megan showed me the text to prove it. Dad isn't thinking clearly anymore. We need to protect the family assets. I'll handle it. He built a trap, she said, and put her face in her hands. Peggy found Marcus Webb through a contact in Long Beach. He met me at a small coffee shop near the water, wary but ready. He'd kept everything, every falsified report, every internal memo, in a sealed envelope, plus something else. A recording from a staff meeting 8 months before he was fired. Back in my hotel room that night, I pressed play. Ethan's voice, calm and precise, ran through timelines and permits. Then, when someone asked about the numbers, "My father has no idea what we're doing. Keep it that way. His name is what we need, not his involvement. If he pushes you, come to me. I'll handle it." I sat with the recorder in my hands for a long time. Peggy called later that night. She'd filed a routine records request, and within 2 hours, the FBI had called her. They'd been investigating Ethan for 14 months already, since a 71-year-old retiree named Thomas Warren lost his life savings and ended up in the hospital with chest pains. 4 more elderly investors had come forward, total damages, over $3 million. "This is no longer a family matter," Peggy said. The next piece came from Marcus, an outside investor funneling money through a Delaware shell company, Pacific Meridian Capital. Peggy traced the beneficial owner through a federal subpoena. The name on the page was Gerald Marsh, a man whose company I had personally rescued from bankruptcy 20 years earlier, who had shaken my hand and told me he'd never forget it. I drove to his house in Newport Beach with Peggy. He let us in, already prepared, already resigned. "Ethan told me you were a silent partner," he said, "by choice." "I was silent because I didn't know," I said. "There's a difference." Peggy played him the recording. His face went gray. "He used me too," Gerald said quietly. "Yes," I said, "but you let him, and the people getting hurt won't care about that distinction." There was one more visit I had to make. Sandra Okafor had been Claire's home care nurse in her final weeks. Sitting in her living room, she told me Ethan had come 3 times near the end, once asking Claire, in a low voice, to sign something for the family, to protect everyone. Claire said no. The last visit, he'd simply sat and talked about the company's future, and Claire had smiled and told Sandra afterward, "He's going to be okay. He just has to get through this on his own." "Was she frightened?" I asked. "No," Sandra said. "She was tired. But in 23 years of this work, your wife is one of the strongest people I've ever cared for. She carried what she carried, on her own terms, until the end." Then came the last cruelty. Megan called, her voice stripped flat and careful. Pacific Life had flagged a beneficiary change on one of Claire's insurance policies, filed 6 months after her death, her signature forged, notarized 3 weeks after her death certificate was recorded. Ethan had used our dead wife's name to redirect money she had left to our daughter. He went back after she couldn't say anything anymore, Megan said, her voice breaking. 2 days later, Peggy, Megan, and I sat across from Special Agent Diana Reyes at the FBI's Los Angeles field office. She laid it out plainly. Wire fraud, bank fraud, elder financial abuse. I qualified as a victim under that statute myself. Insurance fraud, forgery, 5 elderly investors, over $3.4 million in documented losses. Ethan had a project launch event scheduled in 6 weeks at the Beverly Hills Ballroom, and Reyes wanted me there when it happened. "Is there any possibility," she asked, watching me carefully, "that any of this happened with your knowledge or approval?" "No," I said. "There is no such possibility. The 6 weeks that followed were the hardest of my life, not because of what was coming, but because of what I had to pretend not to know." Ethan called on a Tuesday from the garden in Greenwich, warm and easy, inviting me to the launch. "This whole project has your fingerprints on it," he said. I told him I was proud of what he'd built. It wasn't entirely a lie. I was speaking to the son I used to believe existed. The night before the event, an attorney called on Ethan's behalf, a conservatorship petition, filed that evening, claiming I was mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. Peggy was unmoved. "It means nothing legally, and the FBI is already adding it to the complaint as evidence of intent to obstruct." The Beverly Hills Ballroom was full by 10 the next morning. Investors, press, Ethan's staff moving between white linen tables. Gerald Marsh sat near the wall, flanked by lawyers. I sat 4 rows back with Megan. Ethan took the stage looking magnificent, talking about legacy, about vision, about honoring the people who built what came before. Then Claire's photograph appeared on the screen behind him, laughing at our 25th anniversary, deployed to sell a fraud built on her forged name. He reached for the signature page of the investment agreement. I stood up. The room turned. Ethan looked up and saw me, and for one unguarded second, there was something like relief in his face. He thought I was there for him. "My name is Richard Hale," I said, and my voice carried without effort. "Some of you invested money because of that name. You need to understand what it was used for without my knowledge." I laid it out, the forged loans, the falsified losses, the forged will, the forged insurance claim on my dead wife's signature, the conservatorship petition filed the night before to silence me. Ethan gripped the podium, knuckles white. "Dad, stop. You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand exactly what I'm doing," I said. "I'm doing what your mother would have done, if she'd been here to do it herself." Agent Reyes and her team moved toward the stage. Across the room, 2 more agents stepped to either side of Gerald Marsh, who didn't even try to stand. Megan rose from her chair beside me and looked at her brother, not with hatred, just with a stillness that had already made its decision. "The future can't be built by betraying the people who sacrificed everything for you," I told him. His eyes were wet. He was 36 years old and, for one moment, looked very young. "I'm sorry," I said. "Not for that morning, but for everything that had led to it." Then, Agent Reyes stepped to the podium, and the room came apart around us. I sat back down and put my arm around my daughter, while the ballroom dissolved into noise. Ethan eventually entered a cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors, disclosing the full structure of the fraud in exchange for reduced charges, though the core felonies, wire fraud, bank fraud, and the elder abuse enhancement stayed on the table. Gerald Marsh surrendered his business license and avoided prison by cooperating fully. Thomas Warren, the retiree who'd first gone to the FBI, sent me a handwritten letter that winter, thanking me, and telling me he'd chosen to spend what time he had left being grateful instead of angry. Megan's firm finished its contract under receivership, paid in full, and she started choosing smaller projects, ones she wanted, not ones that were simply large enough to matter. I moved back into the house on Maple Ridge that fall. I repainted the front door the same dark green Clare had chosen years before. Daniel drove Claire's portrait up from Pasadena himself and stayed for dinner, telling me stories about her Tuesday afternoons in his gallery. I hung her in the front room, between the 2 windows facing the yard, unfinished hands and all, because some things are more whole left that way. On a Sunday in January, Megan came for dinner and found me standing in front of the painting again. "You're going to wear a path in the floor," she said. "It's a good 12 feet, I told her. She rested her head against my shoulder for a moment, then went to start dinner. I stayed a little longer, looking at Claire's private smile, the patience in her face. A woman who had walked into a gallery on an ordinary Tuesday and trusted an old painter to hold a box until the right person finally came looking for it. "I heard you," I said quietly. "I know I took longer than you'd have liked, But I got there. Then I turned and walked toward the kitchen, toward the smell of garlic and wine, toward my daughter's voice, toward the ordinary, irreplaceable thing that was still here, still waiting to be lived.